Welcome, dear listener, to Sleepy Story Facts, where tonight's sleep story opens like a slow door into the quiet velvet of space, and where this bedtime story asks nothing of you except that you rest, breathe, and gently allow the waking world to grow softer at the edges. Because this nighttime story is designed to help you fall asleep beneath the calmest imaginable sky, drifting on calming narration through one of the most peaceful wonders in astronomy, the local group, our vast and beautiful galactic neighborhood. And before we wander any farther, just let yourself settle in now, noticing the place where you are resting, noticing the steady support beneath you, the softness around your shoulders, the small and natural rhythm of your breathing as it arrives and leaves without effort, and if there is any tension still tucked into the corners of your day, simply imagine it dissolving like a faint mist in cool moonlight, letting your jaw unclench, your forehead smooth, your hands grow loose and quiet, while each breath becomes a little slower, a little heavier, a little kinder. And with every exhale, you can picture yourself floating farther from noise, farther from hurry, farther from all the bright and busy things that demanded your attention earlier, until only this relaxing story remains. Gentle bedtime words, moving as slowly as starlight, inviting your mind toward deep sleep by giving it something soft and spacious to hold. And now, as your body grows more comfortable, imagine that you are resting in a silent observatory with the lights dimmed low, the great dome above you open to the night. And beyond that opening, there is not emptiness in any lonely sense, but a grand and tender neighborhood of galaxies bound together by gravity in a patient gathering called the local group, a cosmic family that stretches across millions of light years and yet feels, in the language of astronomy, wonderfully close, like lanterns glowing in distant gardens across a dark and peaceful valley. And within this neighborhood live more than 100 known galaxies, some large and graceful, some faint and small, some shaped like soft spirals, and others like delicate clouds, all moving in ancient relationship with one another, held by the same quiet laws of nature that guide the moon across the sky and tidewater along a shore. And among these galaxies, 3 are often spoken of most warmly: the Milky Way, our own home galaxy; the Andromeda galaxy, with its broad and luminous spiral form; and the Triangulum galaxy, smaller and more delicate, yet still immense beyond ordinary imagining. And tonight, we do not rush past them, as if collecting facts in a hurried daylight lesson. No, we let each fact become a cushion, each detail a dim star in this gentle bedtime journey, because the local group is not merely a chart in a textbook. It is the slow architecture of our cosmic neighborhood, a place where galaxies keep one another company across immense distances, where dwarf galaxies gather like sleepy cottages around greater spiral cities of stars, and where time itself seems to stretch out and yawn, content to move at the pace of deep space. And perhaps that is why it feels so soothing to visit in the mind, because here everything important happens gradually, patiently, almost beyond the reach of worry, with stars turning in wide rivers, galaxies approaching one another over billions of years, and darkness itself behaving not as something frightening, but as a soft blanket that makes the scattered lights shine more tenderly. And as we drift a little farther in, you may imagine the Milky Way behind you now, not as the flat band seen from Earth, but as the full island of stars it truly is, a magnificent spiral with long curving arms wrapped around a glowing center, carrying our sun, our planets, our small sleeping world, and all the quiet bedrooms and dreaming houses within it. While somewhere ahead, Andromeda glows like a silver harbor in the distance, so far away that its light has traveled for millions of years, simply to arrive at the threshold of your imagination tonight. And still farther to the side rests Triangulum, subtle and serene, a graceful companion in this neighborhood of patient light. And between and around these larger galaxies are many smaller ones, dwarf spheroidals and dwarf irregulars, modest in brightness, yet precious in the story of the local group, because even the faintest galaxies belong here, each one contributing to the calm geometry of our celestial surroundings. And there is something deeply comforting in that thought, that the universe is not only grand, but also communal, arranged not as isolated marvels alone, but as families, clusters, neighborhoods, and relationships. Patterns of belonging written across distances, so vast they quiet the mind rather than agitate it. And so as this sleep story continues, let the facts arrive like slow footsteps on thick carpet, soft and measured. As you remember that our local group spans roughly 10 million light years, that gravity is the invisible thread keeping this neighborhood loosely bound, that the Milky Way and Andromeda are drifting toward one another so slowly that the motion is almost like the movement of continents in a dream, and that the whole group itself is suspended within an even larger cosmic landscape, with still greater structures beyond it. Though tonight we remain here, close to home by astronomical standards, wrapped in the local hush of galaxies, we can almost think of as familiar. And with each sentence, your thoughts may grow dimmer and more spacious, because this is not a story asking you to stay awake and solve anything. It is a gentle bedtime passage through real and beautiful science, a calming narration meant to soften the edges of consciousness, to turn knowledge into comfort, to make astronomy feel like a warm lamp in a quiet room. And as you listen, you may sense that the local group is less a destination than a cradle of scale and silence, a place that reminds the restless mind how small hurry really is, how natural it is to drift, how lovely it is to simply be carried, breathing in, breathing out, floating among neighboring galaxies, while sleep approaches not all at once, but the way starlight arrives, steadily, silently, and without ever needing to announce itself, now that you have drifted softly beyond the familiar swirl of the Milky Way. This sleep story carries you a little farther into the calm middle spaces of the local group, where the great galaxies do not crowd one another, but rest at distances so immense and so unhurried that their companionship feels gentle rather than busy. And in this bedtime story, the darkness between them is not empty in any lonely way, but smooth and deep like cool water at night, holding faint streams of stars, drifting clouds of gas, and the quiet presence of many smaller galaxies that keep patient company with the larger spirals. And as you continue to relax, you may imagine yourself gliding through this wide and velvety region, as though carried by the slowest current in the universe, with no need to steer, no need to decide, no need to do anything at all except listen and let the facts arrive one by one, like tiny lanterns being lit in the hush before sleep. Because one of the most soothing truths about our galactic neighborhood is that it is not made only of grand, famous galaxies, but also of many dwarf galaxies, dozens upon dozens of them, each one modest, delicate, and worthy of notice, some shaped as loose, irregular gatherings of stars and gas, others as soft spheroidal halos with little dust, and almost no new stars being born. And though they are called dwarf galaxies, they are still immense by human standards, each containing millions or even billions of stars, which is a wonderfully calming reminder that in astronomy, even the quietest members of a family can be vast. And here in the local group, these smaller companions often gather around the Milky Way and Andromeda, the way quiet villages might rest around two luminous cities, held in orbit by gravity's patient hand, moving so slowly across cosmic time that their journeys feel less like motion and more like a long, restful thought. And perhaps that is why this relaxing story settles so naturally into the mind, because the local group itself is a lesson in slowness, in the beauty of processes that take millions or billions of years, in the comfort of knowing that not everything must happen quickly to matter. And as your breathing becomes easier and the edges of wakefulness soften, let yourself notice the small Magellanic Cloud and the large Magellanic Cloud, two of the Milky Way's most famous neighboring dwarf galaxies, irregular in shape and full of character, trailing their own histories of star formation while remaining part of our wider galactic neighborhood. And though from Earth they appear as cloudy patches in southern skies, here in imagination they feel like nearby companions in the deep, floating hush, quiet reminders that our home galaxy is not alone, but surrounded by fellow travelers. And farther out, there are many other dwarfs as well, faint satellites whose names may sound almost like lullaby phrases in the night, galaxies discovered through patient observation, their stars spread thinly across darkness, their existence teaching us that the universe often whispers rather than shouts, and that some of its most beautiful things must be noticed slowly, which is exactly how a gentle bedtime journey ought to unfold, and all the while gravity remains the invisible theme beneath everything, the soft and steady force that shapes this neighborhood without noise, binding galaxies into relationship, curving paths over spans so great that even the approach of Andromeda toward the Milky Way is not dramatic here, but serene, a motion measured across billions of years, too slow for urgency, too grand for worry, more like the gradual meeting of two drifting snowfields under moonlight than anything harsh or sudden. And tonight, that future meeting is simply another restful fact, another piece of cosmic timing that reassures the mind that the universe knows how to move slowly. And there is comfort, too, in the idea that the local group has a kind of shared center of mass, an an invisible balance point created by all these galaxies together, as though the neighborhood itself were quietly holding equilibrium in the dark, every member contributing to the calm geometry of the whole. And as this nighttime story continues, you might picture the local group not as a map with labels, but as a sleepy archipelago of starlit islands, each galaxy surrounded by its own old halo of stars and dark matter, each one turning gently in the silence, each one carrying ancient light that has traveled vast distances without haste. And somewhere within all the stillness are nurseries of stars, places where cold gas slowly gathers and collapses, allowing new lights to form, proving that even in the most peaceful corners of space, there is a soft kind of becoming, not frantic, not loud, just steady and patient, like the way deep sleep comes to the body when it is finally given permission to rest. And perhaps that is the most calming lesson of our galactic neighborhood so far, that the local group is full of variety without chaos, movement without rush, structure without strain, a community of galaxies where even the smallest members have their place, and where the darkness is not something to resist, but something tender that lets every distant glow appear more clearly. And so this calming narration keeps floating onward, carrying you between the large spirals and their faint companions, through a region where time feels stretched and softened, where science becomes a cradle rather than a lecture, and where each fact is offered slowly enough that it can dissolve into dream. Because this bedtime story is here to help you fall asleep, to guide the mind into quieter rhythms, to let the thought of galaxies and their patient neighbors settle over you like a blanket of cool midnight blue until your awareness grows pleasantly dim, and the local group itself seems to rock you in a motion almost too gentle to feel. And now, in this soft and unhurried sleep story, you continue your drift through the local group, moving so peacefully through the velvet dark that even the idea of motion feels like a lullaby. And ahead of you, growing just a little clearer in the calm imagination of this bedtime story, is Andromeda, the nearest large spiral galaxy to our own Milky Way, glowing not with any sharp brightness, but with a faraway tenderness, as though someone had placed a silver lantern at the far end of eternity and turned its light down low for the sake of sleep. And as you approach in the gentlest possible way, without hurry and without effort, you may let your mind rest on the comforting thought that galaxies, though unimaginably vast, often resemble things the heart already understands, such as whirlpools, shells, spirals in sand, or the slow unfurling of a fern in morning mist. And Andromeda, with its broad spiral form and ancient populations of stars, seems almost like a great celestial garden scene from very far away, with its luminous center like a softly glowing porch light, and its curving arms like pathways winding through a dream. And because this is a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep, we do not rush to catalog every detail at once, but instead allow each fact to arrive as slowly as a feather settling through still air, beginning with the soothing truth that the light we imagine from Andromeda has traveled for millions of years before reaching us, which means that, in a very quiet sense, looking toward it is also looking into the deep past, into a calmer chapter of cosmic time. And there is something deeply restful in that idea, because it reminds the busy mind that the universe keeps its own pace, one that is slower, wider, and far less anxious than the tempo of an ordinary day. And as you breathe a little more deeply now, perhaps noticing how your body has become heavier and more at ease, you can imagine Andromeda not as a distant object to study, but as a patient neighbor in our galactic neighborhood, a companion galaxy resting across the dark like a softly illuminated island, accompanied by its own smaller satellite galaxies, each one moving within the same broad hush of gravity, each one sharing in the long and peaceful choreography of the local group. And what makes this image so calming is not only its beauty, but its steadiness, because galaxies do not flicker with indecision. They do not hurry. They do not worry. They simply turn, slowly and faithfully, carrying stars in vast arcs around bright centers. And in that turning, there is a kind of cosmic reassurance, a reminder that motion can be smooth, that change can be gradual, and that even enormous things can unfold with almost unimaginable gentleness. And perhaps, as this nighttime story deepens, your own thoughts begin to imitate that rhythm, slowing into wider circles, letting go of their sharper edges, becoming less like busy lists and more like soft spirals. And within Andromeda, there are countless stars, and among those stars, there may be planets, and around those imagined planets, there may be nights of their own, quiet skies of their own, horizons touched by starlight of their own. And although we do not need to know every hidden detail, it is enough to rest with the possibility to feel how spacious and serene the universe becomes when we stop demanding certainty from it and simply float within its beauty. And this is one of the loveliest qualities of sleepy science, that it offers wonder without pressure, truth without noise, knowledge softened into calming narration, so that even large astronomical facts can feel like blankets being drawn slowly over the shoulders of the mind. And now, as we drift in the imagined outskirts of Andromeda's presence, you may picture its central bulge as warm and pearly, densely filled with old stars whose light blends into a gentle radiance, while the spiral arms stretch outward in graceful curves, patterned with dust lanes and star-forming regions, not harshly visible here, but subdued by distance and softened by the dreamy stillness of our bedtime journey. And around it all lies a vast halo, faint and enormous, extending farther than ancient observers could ever have guessed, like a hush around a hush, an almost invisible atmosphere of stars and dark matter that gives the galaxy an even larger and more mysterious grace. And yet, mystery here is not frightening, only soothing, because the unknown is wrapped in silence, and silence is what the tired mind has wanted all along. And somewhere beneath all these facts is another comfort, the knowledge that the local group is not random in its arrangement, but held in relationship by gravity, so that Andromeda, the Milky Way, Triangulum, and many smaller galaxies belong to one another in a broad and quiet way, as neighbors belong to one valley or one shore. And when you think of it like that, astronomy becomes almost intimate, a story not only of distance, but of belonging. And tonight, that belonging extends even to you, resting here on Earth, carried inside the Milky Way, listening to a gentle bedtime story about nearby galaxies while your breathing grows slower and your thoughts drift farther apart. And perhaps the most relaxing fact of all in this moment is that nothing in this vast scene requires your effort, because Andromeda will go on turning whether you watch or not. The stars will continue their patient shining. The local group will remain suspended in its immense dark cradle, and sleep, like Starlight, will arrive best when not chased, when simply welcomed, when given a quiet place to land. And so, let this soft image remain with you now. Andromeda ahead like a silver harbor, the Milky Way behind like a remembered home, and the calm between them wide and cool and safe. While this gentle bedtime passage carries you onward, deeper into stillness, deeper into softness, deeper toward that peaceful place where thoughts dim, muscles loosen, and the mind at last gives itself permission to drift from the soft, silver presence of Andromeda. This sleep story now carries you onward through the local group with the same unhurried grace. And as you continue to float in the cool stillness between galaxies, another gentle shape begins to gather in the distance, fainter and more delicate, as though a spiral had been sketched in moonlit mist and set adrift in the dark for the sole purpose of calming a restless mind. And this is Triangulum, the third great spiral, often named among the principal galaxies of our galactic neighborhood, a quieter companion than the Milky Way or Andromeda, less grand in immediate impression, perhaps, yet profoundly soothing because of that very softness. Because not everything in the universe needs to dominate the sky in order to be beautiful. And as you approach it in imagination, without urgency and without strain, you may notice how naturally the mind relaxes when it is given something vast but gentle to contemplate, something real and scientific, yet slow enough to feel like a lullaby. And Triangulum seems to understand that role perfectly, holding its spiral arms with a kind of understated grace, offering not brilliance in sharp flashes, but a calm arrangement of starlight spread over a broad and quiet form. And in this bedtime story, that is exactly what we need. Another peaceful fact in a sequence of peaceful facts, another reminder that the local group is not a crowded map of noise and collision, but a neighborhood of patient lights, each galaxy occupying its own immense stillness while remaining part of a larger gravitational family. And perhaps, as you listen now, your breathing has become even steadier, almost as if it is matching the spacious rhythm of these galaxies themselves. The inhale like a slow drift inward, the exhale like a release into the dark. And in that gentle pattern, it becomes easy to imagine Triangulum as a lantern at the edge of a great cosmic garden, modest, serene, and content to glow without ceremony. And though smaller than Andromeda and the Milky Way, it is still unimaginably vast by human measure, still filled with stars beyond easy counting, still home to clouds of gas and dust where future stars may one day kindle. And there is deep comfort in that scale, because even a so-called smaller galaxy reminds us how generous the universe is with space, with time, with room for quiet things to exist fully and beautifully. And here in the local group, that generosity seems almost like a bedtime kindness, a way of showing the tired mind that the cosmos is not pressing in upon it, but opening outward in widening rings of calm. And so you drift a little nearer in thought, not close enough to disturb the soft distance that makes sleep possible, but close enough to sense Triangulum's subtle architecture, the center glowing with a muted warmth, the spiral pattern unfolding in broad and graceful arcs, the outer regions fading so tenderly into the dark that galaxy and night appear to be cooperating rather than competing. And that cooperation is another lovely thing to rest with, because the darkness in space is not the enemy of light. It is the setting that allows light to be gentle, the quiet room in which the stars may speak softly. And as this relaxing story continues, you may also picture Triangulum not in isolation, but as part of the larger emotional geography of our galactic neighborhood, a galaxy that helps complete the feeling of the local group, adding balance, variation, and another layer of calm to the scene, much the way a third note can make a chord feel warmer and more complete. And perhaps that is why its presence here feels so right, because after the familiar home of the Milky Way and the silver calm of Andromeda, Triangulum arrives like a final soft tone in a peaceful composition, less commanding, more intimate, and beautifully suited to the quiet descent toward deep sleep. And still, the laws of nature remain simple and tender in their steadiness. Gravity holding these galaxies in long relationship, motion unfolding across spans of time so vast that even change becomes soothing. And somewhere in the immense ages surrounding Triangulum, stars are forming, aging, and fading with no drama at all, just the long breathing of the cosmos, a breathing so slow that the mind, when invited to follow it, begins to let go of its usual tightness and hurry. And now even your thoughts may be growing more spacious, less like a crowded room, and more like a clear night plain, with one distant glow here, one softened idea there, each separated by enough silence to rest comfortably. And that is the hidden gift of a nighttime story like this one, that science does not have to sharpen the mind into wakefulness, but can instead smooth it into wonder, turning galaxies into places of emotional shelter, facts into cushions, distance into peace, and Triangulum, with its faint and beautiful spiral body, seems almost made for that purpose tonight, inviting you to admire without effort, to know without tension, to drift without needing to arrive anywhere at all. And so the local group continues to reveal itself not as a chart to memorize, but as a restful neighborhood of luminous forms, where every galaxy contributes its own quiet character, where every stretch of darkness deepens the serenity of the scene, and where sleep can approach in the most natural way, not as a sudden switch, but as a gradual dimming, like a faraway galaxy becoming softer as mist gathers over a still lake. And if you wish, though there is no need to try, you may simply let Triangulum remain in the background of the mind now, small and elegant, and almost whispering in its stillness, while this gentle bedtime current carries you farther into comfort, farther into calm, and farther into that lovely threshold where the universe grows hazy, the story grows featherlight, and the body remembers that it already knows how to rest. As this sleep story continues its calm and unbroken drift through our galactic neighborhood, you may begin to sense that the local group is held together, not only by the galaxies you can imagine glowing in the dark, but also by something quieter, something unseen and deeply gentle in its effect, like the hidden strength of roots beneath a still forest floor. And that invisible presence is part of what gives this bedtime story its softness tonight, because in astronomy, not everything that matters must shine. And some of the most important structures in the universe are felt through their steady influence rather than seen directly. And so, as you rest more deeply now, breathing easily, letting the edges of your thoughts blur into the comforting dark, imagine that beneath the Milky Way, beneath Andromeda, beneath Triangulum, and all their smaller companion galaxies, there lies an immense and quiet framework, a vast gravitational cradle that helps shape the local group and guide its long, patient motions. And there is something especially soothing in that idea, because it tells us that our galactic neighborhood is not drifting in randomness, but resting within order, held by laws so reliable and ancient that they can carry whole galaxies through the night of cosmic time without haste and without confusion. And perhaps this is one of the most relaxing facts of all, that even on the grandest scales, there is structure beneath the stillness, support beneath the silence, a hidden balance beneath the visible stars. And as this relaxing story deepens, you can picture each galaxy not as a separate island alone, but as part of overlapping halos, broad and delicate spheres, extending far beyond the bright stars we usually imagine. Regions where gravity reaches outward like a calm and patient hand. And in these faint outer realms, there is no noise, no urgency, only the slow and beautiful truth that galaxies are larger than they first appear. Their visible starlight only the warm center of a much wider presence, and that wider presence allows the local group to feel even more like a neighborhood of soft boundaries and shared quiet, where one galaxy's influence stretches gently into the surrounding dark, and the darkness itself becomes part of the story, not blank, not empty, but full of subtle belonging. And if your mind grows hazier here, that is perfectly welcome, because this nighttime story is meant to help you fall asleep by letting facts become atmosphere, by letting science become a blanket of calm. And there is no need to hold every idea sharply, only to feel the general peace of it, the sense that our home in the universe is nested inside layers of quiet relationship. And somewhere in those layers, there is also thin gas, faint and diffuse, spread through the space between galaxies, not dense enough to interrupt the silence, only enough to remind us that even intergalactic space has texture, however subtle. And perhaps that too is comforting, because it means the local group is not a set of hard separations, but a soft continuum, a region where galaxies, gas, gravity, and time all participate in one broad and measured composition. And in this composition, nothing needs to rush toward completion, because the universe is content to work in long spans, and when the mind listens to that lesson for a while, it often begins to loosen its own fast grip on the day. It begins to understand that not every answer must come now. Not every thought must be finished before rest. Not every worry deserves another turn around the room of consciousness. And so, as you float deeper into this gentle bedtime current, imagine the local group once more as a cluster of lanterns hanging over a dark and quiet sea, but now held in place by an unseen architecture below the waterline. A hidden arrangement making the whole pattern stable and serene. And perhaps above and around this image, there is only the faintest movement, galaxies turning slowly in their own dignified ways, small companions circling larger ones, halos extending into one another's outskirts, all of it unfolding so gradually that even change itself feels sleepy. And there is a deep kindness in that pace, because it gives the imagination room to stretch out and rest, room to wander without becoming alert, room to marvel without becoming bright. And that is the special beauty of a gentle bedtime story rooted in astronomy, that it can take truths vast enough to humble the waking mind and soften them into rhythms gentle enough for deep sleep, allowing you to feel at once small and safe, brief and beautifully sheltered. A listener on one quiet world, inside one quiet galaxy, inside one quiet neighborhood of galaxies, all of them held in a larger dark that is not cold in this moment, but velvety and protective. And as the story drifts onward, you may find that the local group no longer feels like an abstract term at all, but like a place with emotional weather, a place of hush and distance and long companionship, where every galaxy glows with patience and every unseen force acts with such steadiness that the whole cosmic neighborhood seems to breathe in one vast, slow rhythm. And if you wish, though you do not need to try, you can let your own breathing follow that same rhythm now, easy in, easy out, while the invisible cradle of gravity carries the Milky Way, carries Andromeda, carries Triangulum, carries all the small and faithful dwarfs, and in some peaceful story-like sense, carries you as well, not toward anything demanding, not toward any ending you must witness, but simply toward softness, toward quiet, toward that dim and pleasant threshold where facts grow weightless, images dissolve into dream, and sleep arrives the way the universe does so many things, gently, continuously, and without a sound, in the soft middle hush of this sleep story, where the local group has become less like a diagram and more like a slowly breathing neighborhood of light. You may now find your attention settling upon its quieter residents, the many little galaxies that move through this vast family with such modesty and patience that they seem almost perfectly made for a bedtime story. And as this gentle bedtime journey continues, you do not need to picture them sharply, because they are loveliest when allowed to remain faint and dreamlike, like dim cottages on a far hillside under a moonlit sky. Each one present, each one real, each one held by the same calm gravity that cradles the grander spirals. And there is something deeply relaxing in that, because the universe does not belong only to the large and luminous, but also to the quiet and the small, to the galaxies that glow softly at the edges of attention and still take their place in the ancient order of things. And so as you breathe in and out, slowly, comfortably, perhaps feeling your thoughts loosen further from the busy knots of the day, imagine these dwarf galaxies drifting around the Milky Way and Andromeda like little lantern boats upon a dark and peaceful sea. Some round and faint, some more irregular, some rich in older stars, others touched by gentle pockets of gas where new starlight may one day awaken. And all of them moving on timescales so long that even motion seems to have fallen half asleep. And perhaps that is why the local group feels so soothing tonight, because it reminds you that not all companionship needs noise, not all communities need closeness, and not all beauty needs brilliance, since here in our galactic neighborhood, even the smallest galaxies are given room, given silence, given millions upon millions of years in which simply to be what they are. And that is a lovely thought to rest beside, especially now when your body may already be sinking a little more deeply into stillness, and your mind may be listening less with effort and more with the floating ease that comes just before deep sleep. And in that softening state, it becomes natural to imagine the local group as a kind of night garden, with the Milky Way and Andromeda as broad flowering spirals, Triangulum as a delicate bloom farther off, and the dwarf galaxies like smaller petals scattered around them, pale and calm and quietly essential to the whole design. And although astronomers give them names and trace their motions with care, tonight you do not need to remember every name, because this relaxing story is not asking you to hold on to details, only to be comforted by their presence, by the knowledge that our cosmic home is full of gentle variety, full of smaller worlds of stars that drift in the margins of the grander lights and make the neighborhood feel more complete, more textured, more inhabited. And as you continue to drift through this nighttime story, you may sense that these little galaxies have a special kind of tenderness about them, because they show that in the universe, as in dreams, what is faint is not unimportant, what is soft is not weak, and what is distant can still belong. And that sense of belonging may settle over you now like a blanket, because you too are part of a layered neighborhood, a world within a solar system, within a galaxy, within the local group, within a wider universe that keeps opening outward in circles of quiet. And rather than making you feel lost, that widening can feel wonderfully calming, because it means there is so much room for rest, so much room for silence, so much room for a single tired mind to set down its thoughts for a while and simply float. And here, among the little galaxies, there is no pressure to understand everything at once, no urgency to arrive anywhere, only the slow companionship of starlight and dark, of gravity and time, of faint halos suspended in an almost velvety stillness. And perhaps one of the most soothing truths of all is that these galaxies endure not by rushing, but by continuing, by turning little by little, by keeping their place in the broad choreography of the local group without ever needing applause. And as this calming narration wraps around you more softly now, it may become easier to feel your own life in gentler terms too, not as a list to complete, not as a race to win, but as something that can unfold in quiet chapters, with pauses, with breath, with room for restoration. And if the mind wanders, let it wander gently here among these small galaxies, where nothing startles and nothing demands, where every fact has been softened by distance, and every distance softened by imagination. And if sleep is already nearing, then let these little companions of the Milky Way keep watch for a while, like faint lights at the edge of a harbor, steady and untroubled, while the larger spirals rest farther off in the dark. And all around them, the local group remains what it has quietly become throughout this bedtime story. Not merely a scientific term, but a peaceful neighborhood of belonging, a cradle of patient motion, a serene arrangement of great galaxies and humble ones alike, all drifting together through the deep night of the cosmos with such calm assurance that your own thoughts may now begin to dim and spread and soften until even the idea of following the story feels unnecessary, and you can simply rest there in the feeling of it, suspended between faraway starlight and the slow kindness of sleep, letting the little galaxies fade to silver mist, letting the vastness become comfort, letting the calm become heavier than thought, and letting this sleep story carry you one quiet breath farther into rest. As this sleep story glides farther into the patient hush of the local group, you may begin to notice that our galactic neighborhood is not made only of galaxies with neat names and softly glowing shapes, but also of subtler traces, long and delicate rivers of stars stretched through the dark like silk threads drifting in still water. And these faint streams, so calm in the imagination, are among the quietest wonders of astronomy, because they tell a story not of violence for us tonight, but of gentle blending over immense ages of smaller star systems, gradually sharing their stars with larger galaxies, until the edges between one home and another become soft, luminous, and hard to separate. And as you rest here, breathing slowly, feeling perhaps that your body has become wonderfully heavy while your thoughts have grown feather-light, you can imagine these stellar streams as pale pathways curving through the halos of galaxies, old stars traveling together in graceful bands, still remembering the motion of the systems they once belonged to. And there is something deeply soothing in that image, because it suggests that even in the vastness of space, history can linger as a pattern of light, not sharply, not loudly, but tenderly, like footprints preserved in morning frost. And in the local group, these dim starry pathways help astronomers understand how galaxies have grown over time, gathering companions slowly, absorbing some, surrounding others, and building themselves, not all at once, but in long, patient chapters, which is such a comforting way for the universe to work, because it means even the grandest structures around us were not rushed into being, but formed through countless quiet intervals, through repetition, through waiting, through the kind of slow becoming that feels perfectly at home in a bedtime story. And perhaps, as this calming narration continues, you can picture the Milky Way wrapped in a broad halo of old stars, and somewhere within that halo, barely brighter than mist, are the lingering traces of ancient companions, stretched by gravity into long, elegant arcs, while Andromeda too, far across the local group, carries its own faint shells and streams in the darkness around it, as though both great galaxies were wearing translucent scarves woven from memory and time. And what makes this thought so restful is that these structures are not hurried events in the night sky, but patient records written across millions and billions of years, so slowly arranged that the mind can settle into them the way it settles into rain on a window, or the slow movement of clouds under moonlight. And once again, the local group reveals itself as a neighborhood where nothing important needs to happen quickly, where even change leaves behind beauty, where even motion becomes softness when spread across enough time. And you may feel, as you drift through this nighttime story, that the darkness between galaxies is becoming richer rather than emptier, more textured, more full of quiet detail, because now the space around the larger galaxies contains not only dwarf companions and invisible halos, but also these pale star streams, these ribbons of ancient light curving so delicately that they seem almost made of sleep itself. And perhaps that is why your own thoughts have begun to stretch and thin as well, losing their hard outlines, becoming less like problems and more like drifting strands of memory, harmless and soft, moving through the mind without needing to be held. And if that is happening, then the story is carrying you exactly where it hoped to carry you, toward that lovely threshold where facts become atmosphere and atmosphere becomes rest. And still the science beneath it all remains real and quietly beautiful. For the local group is not static, not frozen, but alive with very slow transformation. Galaxies growing through long companionship, halos preserving faint traces of the past, gravity shaping pathways so broad and subtle that only patient observation can reveal them. And all of that patience becomes part of the mood tonight, part of the deep rhythm that lets this relaxing story help you fall asleep. Because what could be more calming than a universe that writes its history in dim starlight across the dark, without haste, without noise, without ever demanding attention? And so you continue to drift, not toward any destination that matters, but through a widening awareness of how gentle our galactic neighborhood can be when seen in this sleepy way, with the Milky Way behind you like a remembered home, Andromeda farther off like a silver harbor, Triangulum resting faintly at the edge of awareness, and between them, these subtle currents of ancient stars, weaving the local group into something even softer than a map, something more like a tapestry suspended in midnight air. And the longer you imagine it, the more it seems that the universe is not only vast, but tender in its vastness, willing to let every structure emerge slowly, willing to let every stream of stars fade gradually into dream, willing to hold entire galaxies inside a silence so complete that your own breathing can begin to feel like part of it, steady and easy, rising and falling with no effort at all. And perhaps this is the most peaceful lesson of tonight's journey so far, that the cosmos does not simply contain light and darkness, but blends them endlessly, letting stars gather into galaxies, galaxies gather into neighborhoods, and old pathways of starlight remain draped between them like quiet memories that never need to be spoken aloud. And now, as your mind drifts more freely and the sentences grow softer around the edges, you can let those rivers of starlight carry the last wakeful fragments of thought away, not removing them suddenly, only stretching them thinner and gentler until they dissolve into the dark. And all that remains is the feeling of floating in a neighborhood of galaxies where every motion is patient, every glow is softened by distance, and every fact arrives like a whispered blessing for sleep. And now, as this sleep story carries you deeper into the soft stillness of the local group, you may begin to feel a gentler kind of motion all around you. Not the hurried motion of daily life, not the restless turning of clocks and schedules, but the very slow and patient dance of galaxies themselves, each one moving through the darkness with such dignity and such calm that even the idea of motion becomes soothing. And in this bedtime story, that is a lovely thing to rest with, because the Milky Way, Andromeda, Triangulum, and their many smaller companions are not standing still in the dark, but drifting, circling, responding to one another through gravity in a choreography so vast and unhurried that it feels almost like a lullaby written across millions of light years. And as your breathing slows and your body grows heavier and more comfortable, you can imagine yourself floating high above this whole galactic neighborhood, watching the local group not as a rigid map, but as a mobile of light suspended in a silent room. Every galaxy gently tugging on the others, every path curved by invisible balance, every movement unfolding so slowly that it seems less like travel and more like a long, peaceful thought. And perhaps that is one of the most relaxing facts in all of sleepy science, that our cosmic neighborhood is alive with motion. Yet none of that motion feels rushed, because on these scales time stretches into something spacious and generous, something that allows even the grandest journeys to remain soft around the edges. And here in this relaxing story, you do not need to calculate anything or hold any diagram in your mind. You only need to feel the calm truth of it, that the galaxies around us are companions in a vast gravitational waltz, moving patiently through the dark, while the silence between them remains wide and tender. And there is comfort in knowing that Andromeda, glowing ahead like a silver lantern seen across a sleeping sea, is slowly approaching the Milky Way, not in any way that needs to stir the mind tonight, but in the serene, measured way of cosmic things, over spans so immense that whole ages of stars may pass before their relationship fully changes. And because this is a gentle bedtime journey, we hold that fact softly as a reminder that even large transformations in the universe are usually carried out with breathtaking patience. Step by step, orbit by orbit, quiet age after quiet age. And nearby Triangulum too keeps its own place in this delicate choreography, a lighter spiral note in the broader composition, while the smaller dwarf galaxies move in patient attendance, some circling their larger neighbors, some drifting through wider paths, all of them contributing to the calm geometry of the local group. And if your thoughts are beginning to blur a little now, that is perfectly welcome, because this nighttime story is meant to help you fall asleep not by exciting the mind, but by giving it something slow and beautiful enough to rest inside. And what could be more restful than a neighborhood of galaxies whose steps are measured in billions of years, whose changes arrive like tides, so gradual they can scarcely be felt, whose whole existence seems to whisper that there is no need to hurry, no need to force, no need to grasp, because everything meaningful can unfold in its own time. And as you continue drifting in imagination, you may sense that the darkness of the local group is becoming even softer than before, not empty, but full of distance, full of relationship, full of the hush that allows each galaxy to move without crowding the others. And perhaps this feels a little like floating in a great cathedral after all the candles have been lit and all the voices have gone quiet, where the air itself seems to hold memory and reverence, and where every visible thing is supported by a deeper stillness. And in that stillness, the Milky Way turns with its own ancient grace. Andromeda shines with broad spiral calm. Triangulum lingers like a delicate companion at the edge of awareness. And the little galaxies keep their modest places around them, each one part of a neighborhood that is never idle and never frantic, only patient, only steady, only deeply, beautifully slow. And that slowness has its own power over the mind, because the more you imagine it, the less urgent your own thoughts begin to feel, until worries that seemed sharp a little while ago start to loosen and drift apart like tiny fragments of cloud beneath a moonlit sky. And this is how a gentle bedtime story can become a cradle, by taking true and peaceful facts and letting them move through you at the rhythm of sleep, by turning astronomy into calming narration, by making the local group feel not distant and abstract, but close in an emotional sense, a neighborhood whose patient motion can teach the tired mind how to soften, how to release, how to stop trying quite so hard to remain awake. And maybe now you can simply picture the entire local group rocking very slightly in the great dark, galaxies moving along their ancient paths, halos overlapping at the edges, faint streams of stars remembering older journeys, all of it held together in a quiet balance so immense and so serene that your own breathing seems to join it. Inhale and exhale, tide and return, drift and stillness, until the story itself begins to feel less like words and more like a slow current carrying you somewhere safe, somewhere dim, somewhere wonderfully untroubled, where the dance of galaxies continues without noise and without effort, and where sleep can arrive just as these motions do, gently, gradually, and in perfect time. As this sleep story continues its gentle drift through the local group, you may feel yourself being carried back, very softly, toward the outer reaches of our own Milky Way, not toward its busy inner brightness, but toward the quiet halo where home becomes faint, where the familiar galaxy loosens at the edges and melts into the greater stillness of our galactic neighborhood. And this is a lovely place for a bedtime story to linger, because it is neither fully within nor fully beyond, but somewhere tender in between, a borderland of starlight and shadow, where the great spiral of our home galaxy seems to exhale into the dark. And as you rest here in this relaxing story, with your breathing slow and your body growing heavier with comfort, You can imagine the Milky Way's bright disk, now far behind its own outer glow, while around you, the halo extends in every direction like the softest veil. A vast and ancient region filled with old stars, faint globular clusters, and the quiet reach of gravity. And there is something deeply calming in the idea that a galaxy does not end sharply, but gently, as though even something so immense prefers to fade rather than stop, to soften rather than break. And perhaps that thought meets you exactly where you are tonight, at the edge of waking and sleep, at the edge of thought and dream, where your own awareness may also be becoming less defined, less effortful, less attached to the brighter centers of the day. And this nighttime story invites you to rest in that softness, because the outer Milky Way is a place of gradual transitions, where stars grow fewer, distances grow wider, and silence deepens into a kind of cosmic hush that feels almost designed for deep sleep. And if you picture it now, this halo of our galaxy may seem like a dim lantern glow seen through layers of mist, not dazzling, not demanding, only present in a quiet and faithful way, carrying the oldest memories of the Milky Way in its ancient stars. And around those stars, there are globular clusters, dense round gatherings of very old suns orbiting far from the galactic center, like little jewel boxes tucked into the dark, patient companions that have circled for unimaginable spans of time. And in this gentle bedtime passage, they do not feel crowded or mathematical, only serene, like small silver seeds drifting in a wide blue-black sea. And all of this belongs to the local group too, because our galactic neighborhood is not only made of the great spirals as they appear in pictures, but also of their outskirts, their halos, their quiet satellites, their long, invisible reaches into intergalactic space. And the more you imagine those outer reaches, the more soothing the universe becomes, because what looked at first like separate islands of light now feels more like a landscape of soft boundaries, a series of glows fading into one another across vast, calm distances. And perhaps that is one reason astronomy can become such a perfect sleep story, because it reminds the mind that not everything needs a hard edge. Not every question needs a bright answer. Not every thought needs to remain sharp and awake. And here, at the misty edge of the Milky Way, even knowledge itself feels softened, less like a lesson and more like a blanket laid carefully over the imagination. And as this calming narration moves on, you may notice how comforting it is to think of home on this scale, not just as one room or one city or one world, but as a galaxy with a halo so wide and ancient that it reaches quietly toward its neighboring galaxies, and farther still beyond that are Andromeda and Triangulum, resting in their own distant calm, while small dwarf galaxies move through the local group like sleepy companions on long and silent paths. And somehow all of it together creates a feeling not of isolation, but of belonging, because the Milky Way is part of something larger, and you are part of the Milky Way, which means that even here, floating at the softened edge of home, there is a deep and wordless sense of being held within a wider arrangement, and that arrangement is patient beyond measure, never hurrying you, never asking you to solve it before dawn, only offering you its scale its hush, and its steady rhythm. And maybe now your thoughts have already begun to drift like these halo stars, farther apart from one another, dimmer, less insistent, as if the mind itself were entering its own outer region where concerns lose their gravity and simply float. And if that is happening, then let it happen, because this bedtime story was always meant to guide you here, to this soft threshold where the Milky Way becomes mist and the local group becomes a cradle of distance and calm. And from this vantage, there is no need to go anywhere else tonight. No need to travel onward or return, because the halo is enough. The faint stars are enough. The old clusters turning slowly in the dark are enough. And your breathing, steady and easy, is enough too, rising and falling like a small rhythm inside a much larger stillness. And so you remain here now, at the tender edge of our home galaxy, where visible light fades into unseen structure, where science becomes atmosphere, where the night grows velvet and kind, and where sleep can come the same way a halo comes, gradually, softly, almost without your noticing, until what was once distinct becomes gentle, what was once wakeful becomes dreamy, and what was once a story becomes only a feeling of floating, safe and quiet, in the far, misty outskirts of the Milky Way, from the misty outer halo of the Milky Way, where home had already begun to soften into distance. This sleep story now carries you gently outward once more, not with any sense of departure or leaving behind, but with the peaceful feeling of drifting from one quiet room into another. And ahead of you lies one of the calmest places in our galactic neighborhood, the wide intergalactic sea of the local group, that immense and velvety space between the great islands of stars, where darkness is not empty in any lonely sense, but spacious, cool, and wonderfully kind to a tired mind. And as this bedtime story continues, you may simply imagine yourself floating there with no weight at all, no schedule, no task, no need to hold on to the sharper edges of thought, because this relaxing story is made for nights like this, when the mind longs to loosen and the body longs to settle. And here in the quiet sea between galaxies, there's almost nothing to disturb the stillness, only the far-off presence of the Milky Way behind you, Andromeda resting ahead like a silver lantern over dark water, Triangulum faint and graceful to one side, and between them, all a vastness so patient that it seems to slow your thoughts merely by being imagined. And perhaps that is one of the gentlest facts about the local group, that its true beauty is not only in the galaxies themselves, but in the distances that separate them, because those distances create room for calm, room for silence, room for the kind of soft wonder that helps a listener fall asleep. And if you let yourself sink a little more deeply into that thought now, you may begin to feel that the space around you is not cold or severe, but more like deep midnight blue velvet, smooth and endless, and quiet enough to hold every last restless thought without resistance. And as those thoughts arrive, they can simply drift here for a while, passing like tiny grains of starlight through the dark, growing less urgent with every slow breath. And in this nighttime story, the local group becomes almost oceanic, its galaxies like distant shores, its halos like faint coastlines of invisible mist, Its small satellites, like lantern boats, scattered far from land. And you, dear listener, are in the calm middle water, where everything is gentle, and nothing asks to be solved before sleep, and even time behaves differently here, stretched so widely that motion becomes almost indistinguishable from stillness, as if the galaxies themselves were breathing in an ancient rhythm too slow for worry, too wide for fear, too serene for anything but rest. And that may be the most comforting lesson of this chapter, that stillness does not require perfect stillness at all, only motion slow enough to feel trustworthy, like a cradle rocking so lightly that the body almost forgets it is moving. And as you float farther into this soft region of the local group, you may imagine faint particles, traces of gas, and the invisible reach of gravity gently crossing the dark around you. Not enough to break the silence, only enough to remind you that even the emptiest seeming spaces in the universe are full of subtle connection, and that connection has its own calming beauty, because it means nothing here is truly isolated. Not the Milky Way, not Andromeda, not the smaller dwarf galaxies resting in their long orbits, and not even you listening from your own quiet corner of Earth, carried by one small world within one spiral galaxy, within this beautiful neighborhood of light. And somehow, that layered belonging can feel more restful than any conclusion, because it asks nothing more than that you let yourself be included in the calm. And now, perhaps your breathing is slower still, your thoughts softer still, your awareness drifting in and out of the sentences, the way a sleeper drifts near shore, listening to water in the dark. And that is perfect, because this gentle bedtime passage does not need your full attention anymore. Only your presence, only your permission to become heavier, dimmer, more relaxed, while the intergalactic sea continues around you in every direction, smooth and unbroken, and the galaxies remain where they are, shining at immense distances with no impatience at all. And if one part of the waking mind still wishes to keep watch, let it watch these far-off lights for a little while longer. Let it rest on the soft glow of Andromeda, the remembered hush of the Milky Way's halo, the faint elegance of Triangulum, and the many little galaxies scattered through the local group like quiet houses with all their lamps turned low, because there is nothing sharp here, nothing sudden, nothing that pulls you back toward daytime brightness. Only the slow, tender scale of astronomy turning into calming narration. Only the peaceful sense that the universe is larger than worry and slower than hurry, and that somewhere in such vast and patient darkness, there is room for deep sleep to arrive without being summoned, without being chased, without being forced. And so this sleep story lets you drift farther into the wide middle of our galactic neighborhood, where the space between galaxies becomes a soft cradle, where distance itself becomes soothing, and where the last wakeful thoughts can finally dissolve like pale mist over still water, leaving you floating in a quiet sea of stars, held by the local group, held by the night, and held by the simple and ancient permission to rest from the quiet sea between the galaxies, where the dark had become as smooth and calm as still water under a moonless sky. This sleep story now lets you drift almost imperceptibly toward the faint outer hush of Andromeda. not toward its brighter heart, not toward anything sharp or wakeful, but toward the soft and distant edge where a great spiral galaxy first begins to feel like weather in the night, like a pale silver tide spreading through the dark. And as this bedtime story carries you there, you may let yourself grow even heavier in rest, even slower in thought, because there is nothing here that asks for effort, only the gentle presence of one neighboring galaxy resting across the local group like a lantern whose glow has been lowered for the sake of sleep. At this distance, Andromeda does not seem like a crowded place of countless stars, though of course it is, but like a great breathing shape in the dark. A calm radiance with edges so soft that the mind cannot help but soften with them, and perhaps that is why this relaxing story lingers here for a while. Because some of the most peaceful moments in astronomy happen not when we stand at the center of things, but when we remain at their borders, where brightness becomes mist and motion becomes feeling, and where the vast scale of the universe turns from something impressive into something deeply comforting, almost like a hand resting lightly over a blanket to smooth it flat as you float nearer in imagination. Still, at a wonderful and dreamy distance, you may picture the outer halo of Andromeda as an invisible garden surrounding the galaxy's glow, a place where ancient stars drift far from the brighter spiral arms, where faint companions keep their patient company, and where the dark itself seems to cradle everything with exquisite care. And because this is a gentle bedtime journey, we do not hurry through those outskirts or name every subtle structure that might dwell there, but simply allow the feeling of spaciousness to settle over you, the way cool night air settles over a sleeping field, gradually, and without any need to announce itself. Behind you, somewhere far away now, the Milky Way remains a remembered home, softened by distance and folded into the larger calm of the local group, while Triangulum lingers like a delicate thought at the edge of awareness. And between all of these neighboring galaxies, there stretches that same patient darkness, not an emptiness to fear, but a silence so complete and so generous that every distant light appears gentler within it. And perhaps your own thoughts are beginning to resemble those distant lights now, fewer and farther apart, glowing softly for a moment, and then fading again into a calm interior night. There is a lovely kind of reassurance in approaching Andromeda this way, because nothing about it disturbs the stillness. Even a galaxy so immense can seem tender when held at the right distance. And in that tenderness, there is a lesson the sleepy mind understands very well, that large things do not always need to feel overwhelming, that vastness can be velvety rather than harsh, and that the universe, when visited slowly enough, has many rooms made entirely of peace. And this may be one of them, this breathing edge of our neighboring spiral, where old starlight and deep dark mingle so softly that the boundaries between them seem to dissolve. If you wish, though there is no need to try too hard, you may imagine that you are floating through a very faint silver snowfall made of ancient light, not bright enough to awaken you, only present enough to give the dark a texture, a hush, a kind of almost music that is felt rather than heard. And around you the halo of Andromeda extends in wide stillness, carrying memories of long ages, countless quiet turnings, and patient companions moving on paths so slow that they feel more like thoughts than motions. And all the while, the local group remains what it has gradually become throughout this nighttime story. A neighborhood not of noise or urgency, but of relationship, distance, and calm belonging. Perhaps that is why it feels so easy now to release the last little tensions of the day. Because when the mind is invited into a place where galaxies themselves move with such serenity, it begins to remember that rest is natural, that slowing down is not failure, that drifting is not losing one's way, but entering a gentler way of traveling. And in that spirit, you can let the story carry you without following every word, the way a person in a boat lets a quiet current carry them through fog toward a shore they never need to reach before morning. Andromeda remains ahead, luminous but subdued, a neighboring presence more than a destination. And its softness seems to spread into everything now, into the dark between thoughts, into the rhythm of your breathing, into the pleasant heaviness gathering behind your eyes, until even the idea of distance becomes drowsy and sweet. And what mattered at the start of the evening no longer seems to require such close attention. Here, on the breathing edge of a great spiral galaxy, the local group feels less like astronomy and more like a cradle made of patience, with one great light ahead, one great light behind, and many smaller silences in between, all of them held in a balance so old and so quiet that your own small wakefulness can simply settle into it and disappear. So remain here a little longer, at this soft threshold of Andromeda's presence, where no star shines too sharply and no thought needs to complete itself, where the dark is deep but kind, where neighboring galaxies keep each other company across impossible distances, and where sleep, like the slow turning of all these ancient lights, can arrive without effort, without announcement, and almost without your noticing, until the silver edge before you becomes hazier, gentler, dimmer, and the whole of our galactic neighborhood begins to rock you in its vast and silent arms at the soft breathing edge of Andromeda, where the great neighboring spiral has become less a destination than a silver atmosphere in the dark. This sleep story invites you to drift a little longer, not inward toward brightness, but sideways into the quiet company that surrounds it. Because even a galaxy as serene and vast as Andromeda does not rest alone in the local group. And around it, there linger many smaller companions, faint dwarf galaxies, moving with such patience and humility that they seem almost like little lanterns, hung at a respectful distance around a larger and older home. And there is something profoundly calming in that arrangement, because it reminds the weary mind that the universe is built not only from grand centers and dramatic forms, but also from gentle relationships, from smaller presences that keep faithful company across deep time. And so, as this bedtime story continues, you may picture yourself floating among these quiet companions now, not close enough to disturb their stillness, only near enough to feel their presence as soft glows in the wide dark, each one modest, each one real, each one held by the same invisible gravity that binds the local group into a neighborhood of patient belonging. Some of these little galaxies are diffuse and dim. Their stars spread lightly through space as though sprinkled by a careful hand, while others gather their old stars into rounder, calmer forms. And because this is a relaxing story designed to help you fall asleep, you do not need to remember their names or sort them into categories, only to feel the emotional shape of them, the peaceful truth that even the outskirts of Andromeda are inhabited by quiet companions, each moving in long orbits, so unhurried that a whole human history would pass like a single soft blink against their larger journeys. And perhaps that thought eases something in you now, because it places your own day, with all its demands and small sharp edges, inside a much wider and gentler rhythm, one in which nothing important needs to happen quickly, and everything that truly belongs can take its time. Around you, the dark remains smooth and deep, not blank, but velvety, touched here and there by faint stars and soft halos. And somewhere beyond this drifting circle of satellite galaxies, the fuller body of Andromeda glows like a silver harbor behind thin mist, while farther away still the Milky Way waits as a remembered home across the local group. And Triangulum keeps its delicate place in the larger quiet, so that all through our galactic neighborhood there is this same pattern repeating itself. Larger galaxies with smaller companions, halos with faint streams, distance with belonging. And perhaps this repeating pattern is one reason space can feel so soothing in a nighttime story, because it offers order without pressure, complexity without noise, and beauty that never crowds the senses. If you let your thoughts grow even softer now, you may imagine these dwarf companions of Andromeda as little houses with their lamps turned low, resting on the hillsides of a cosmic evening. And though each one contains more stars than the waking mind could comfortably hold, tonight they are reduced to their gentlest essence, pale lights in a broad and silent neighborhood, enough to comfort, but not enough to awaken, enough to suggest life and history and ancient turning, but softened by distance into something dreamlike and kind. And this is the special gift of sleepy science, that it allows truth to remain true while still becoming tender, allowing galaxies to be vast and yet calming, ancient and yet intimate, immeasurable and yet somehow cozy. The small lanterns around Andromeda do not compete for attention, and that too is restful, because they simply remain where they are, drifting in quiet attendance, teaching by their existence that presence does not need to be loud to matter. And perhaps as you listen, some part of your own mind begins to trust that lesson, begins to release the need to keep thinking, to keep sorting, to keep doing, and instead rests like one of these faint companions in the greater field of night, held in place by something deeper than effort. There are old stars in these galaxies, and old paths, and long invisible curves traced by gravity through the dark. And all of it unfolds so slowly that the words themselves can begin to blur into rhythm, into tide, into hush. And that is perfectly welcome now, because this sleep story does not need you to follow every detail any longer, only to float with it, gently, as though the local group itself had become a cradle rocking, almost too softly to feel. Andromeda remains near, though never overwhelming, its great halo extending around you like a silver weather of ancient light. And the little galaxies around it continue their faithful drifting, each one a small, calm note in the larger music of our galactic neighborhood. And as you remain among them for a while, the whole universe seems to lower its voice further until even the idea of astronomy becomes less like information and more like atmosphere, less like distance and more like shelter. Here, there is no rush to move onward, no need to approach the center, no requirement to understand more before resting, because this chapter of the night is content simply to let you drift among these quiet companions, to let the small lanterns of Andromeda keep soft watch while your breathing slows, your thoughts grow lighter, and the edges of the story begin to melt into dream until the dwarf galaxies themselves seem to become little floating embers in a great blue-black sea, dimmer and dimmer, steadier and steadier, and sleep arrives the way they move, without hurry, without strain, and with a silence so complete that it feels like kindness, leaving the small lanterns around Andromeda exactly as they are, glowing faintly and faithfully in the silver hush of the galaxy's outer company. This sleep story now carries you into an even quieter understanding of the local group, not by moving quickly anywhere new, but by helping you feel the balance beneath all these neighboring galaxies, the broad and gentle arrangement that allows them to share one immense neighborhood without crowding one another. And as this bedtime story settles more deeply around you, you may imagine yourself floating in a place where no single galaxy asks for all your attention, where the Milky Way remains a soft memory behind you. Andromeda rests like a diffused lantern nearby. Triangulum lingers farther off like a faint shell of starlight, and the many smaller dwarfs drift in patient attendance, all held within a silent structure, so calm that even thinking about it begins to quiet the mind. And perhaps that is one of the most relaxing facts about our galactic neighborhood, that the local group is not only a collection of galaxies, but a slow and beautiful balance, a kind of cosmic breathing space where every large spiral, every small companion, every halo and faint stream belongs to one wider harmony. And because this relaxing story is meant to help you fall asleep, we do not treat that harmony as something technical or sharp-edged, but as something felt, like the balance of a room after the lamps have been dimmed, or the balance of a harbor after the last wave has folded itself back into still water. And here, in this nighttime story, that balance feels almost like kindness, because it means nothing in this neighborhood has to rush in order to belong. Nothing has to shine more brightly than it wishes. Nothing has to prove its importance before it may simply rest in place. And that is a soothing thought to carry into deep sleep, especially now, when your own breathing may already be slower, and your body may already feel as if it has been gently lowered into a softer layer of the night. If you wish, you may imagine the local group from very far away now, not so far that it loses its intimacy, but far enough that it becomes a small archipelago of luminous forms in a sea of velvet dark. And from this dreamy distance, each galaxy seems to glow with its own mood. The Milky Way warm with the feeling of home, Andromeda Andromeda cool and silver, with neighboring calm. Triangulum subtle and delicate, like a whispered note, and the dwarf galaxies, like little embers scattered around them, each one contributing to the whole without disturbing the stillness. And perhaps, as you picture them this way, you can feel how space itself becomes part of the comfort, because the dark between the galaxies is not a gap to fear, but a cushion, a cradle, a patient silence in which every light may remain gentle. This is why sleepy science can be such a tender companion at the end of the day, because it takes realities so vast they might seem overwhelming in brighter hours, and lets them become soft, spacious, and deeply reassuring, turning a sleep story into a place where astronomy feels less like distance and more like shelter, less like cold abstraction, and more like a gentle bedtime across scales too large to trouble the heart. And here in the balanced hush of the local group, that shelter becomes almost complete, because everything is moving, and yet nothing feels hurried. Everything is changing, and yet nothing feels unstable. Everything belongs to a larger pattern, and yet the pattern never presses itself upon you with noise or urgency. And perhaps your own mind is beginning to imitate that pattern now, loosening into wider intervals, letting one thought drift gently away before the next even arrives, allowing silence to grow between ideas, the way intergalactic space grows between the spirals. And if that is happening, then the story is carrying you beautifully, exactly as it hoped to, toward that peaceful threshold where words no longer need to be followed closely, where facts become atmosphere, where atmosphere becomes comfort, and where comfort becomes sleep. Around you, there is only the broad hush of our galactic neighborhood, a hush shaped by gravity, distance, age, and starlight, yet felt tonight as something almost domestic in its softness, like the final quiet that settles through a house when everyone has gone to bed, and the only remaining light is a dim one far down the hall. And in that soft comparison, the local group becomes wonderfully intimate, not because it is small, but because it is patient, because it gives every galaxy room, because it allows every motion to unfold at a pace so slow that the mind cannot help but soften in response. And now perhaps even the idea of where you are drifting matters less than before, because the entire neighborhood has become a single soothing presence, one continuous field of calm carrying the Milky Way, Andromeda, Triangulum, their companions, their halos, and their faint old rivers of stars in one vast and measured stillness. So remain here for a while, not traveling, not arriving, only floating in the balance between all lights, while this gentle bedtime passage grows dimmer around the edges, and the galaxies of the local group become less like separate destinations and more like breaths in one sleeping body of the cosmos, rising and falling so slowly that the motion can barely be felt. And as they do, the last watchful part of the mind may finally loosen its grip, trusting the dark, trusting the distance, trusting the calm arrangement of everything around it, until this relaxing story becomes little more than a soft current under consciousness, a calm narration moving beneath the surface of awareness. And sleep comes the way these galaxies keep company with one another, quietly, steadily, and without ever needing to announce its arrival. From that calm balance between all lights, where the local group had become a single sleeping neighborhood of spirals, halos, and little companion galaxies, this sleep story now drifts toward something even gentler, something older, quieter, and softer around the edges. The ancient stars themselves, the ones that have been shining for so long that they seem less like individual suns and more like a memory held by the universe. And as this bedtime story settles around you a little more deeply, you may imagine that all through our galactic neighborhood there are very old stars keeping quiet watch, not only in the Milky Way, not only in Andromeda, not only in Triangulum, but in the faint dwarf galaxies too, patient lights that have endured through ages beyond easy thought. And there is something deeply comforting in that, because old stars do not hurry. They do not compete. They do not ask to be noticed all at once. They simply remain, glowing with a kind of faithful stillness that feels perfectly suited to a relaxing story designed to help you fall asleep. Perhaps now your mind is calm enough to picture them as tiny embers in a vast midnight hearth, spread across the local group in great gentle constellations of time, each one carrying a story that began long before our own world had taken its current shape. And yet, tonight, they do not feel remote or overwhelming, only soothing, because age in this nighttime story is not heavy, but tender, a sign that the universe knows how to continue quietly, how to hold light for a very long time without strain, how to let brilliance soften into endurance in the halos of galaxies, in old star clusters, in the outer places where the bright spiral arms have faded into hush. These elder lights remain like soft witnesses. And if you imagine them now, scattered through the dark, above and around you, they may seem almost like caretakers of sleep, not watching in any restless way, only existing with such calm persistence that your own breathing begins to borrow their rhythm, slow and steady, easy in, easy out, as if the whole local group were breathing with you in one ancient, spacious tide. There is a lovely peace in remembering that not all stars are young and blazing in dramatic nurseries of gas, because some belong to the earliest chapters of their galaxies, and their presence gives the Milky Way and its neighbors a feeling of depth, of memory, of a story told not in hurried sentences, but in long and unbroken silences. And perhaps that is exactly what your own thoughts need now. Not more brightness, not more activity, but the soft companionship of things that have lasted quietly around these ancient stars. The universe seems to move even more slowly, and in their company, the local group becomes less a place of motion and more a place of gentle endurance, where great galaxies can turn and companion dwarfs can drift, and faint streams of stars can trail through the dark, all while these elder lights continue their patient shining, almost too calmly to be called shining at all, more like resting in light than producing it, more like being than doing. And that is such a soothing lesson for a tired mind, because it suggests that rest itself can be a kind of radiance, that stillness can have its own quiet glow, and that one need not blaze brightly to belong in the night. If you wish, you may imagine yourself drifting among these old stars now, not close enough to disturb them, only near enough to feel the softness of their presence. And perhaps they seem arranged in little silent gatherings, like lanterns left burning in distant windows across a sleeping hillside, each one separate, and yet all part of the same larger piece. And in that image, the local group becomes wonderfully intimate again, not smaller, but kinder, as though its vastness had folded itself into something more cradle-like, something that can hold not only galaxies and time, but also the gentle surrender of your thoughts as they begin to loosen and dim. The Milky Way is still there somewhere behind the haze of imagination. Andromeda still breathes in silver quiet ahead. Triangulum still lingers as a delicate spiral thought, and the many small dwarf galaxies still keep their soft company around the larger lights. But now all of them seem calmer because of these older stars hidden through their outskirts and halos. These quiet witnesses to cosmic time, and perhaps your mind, hearing of them, has begun to feel less interested in following every detail and more willing to simply float, to let the words become a tide under consciousness, to let the story hold you without requiring anything in return. That is the gift of a gentle bedtime passage like this, that it does not force wonder into brightness, but dims it lovingly until wonder itself becomes restful. And here, among the oldest lights of our galactic neighborhood, rest seems to be the deepest truth of all, not because the universe is asleep, but because it is so patient that even its oldest fires can feel like lullabies. So remain here a little longer, among these quiet elder stars of the local group, where time is deep, the dark is velvety, and every distant point of light seems to say the same soft thing in its own ancient language, that nothing is required of you now, that the night is wide enough to hold every unfinished thought, and that deep sleep can come just as the oldest stars keep shining, gently, steadily, and without the slightest need to hurry. From the quiet company of the oldest stars, where the local group had seemed to slow into pure memory and patient light, this sleep story now drifts with almost imperceptible softness toward Triangulum once again, not toward any bright center or vivid detail, but toward its gentlest impression, the faint whisper of a spiral resting in the dark, like a seashell, half buried in midnight sand. And as this bedtime story continues, you may feel how natural it is to let your attention become lighter here, because Triangulum does not ask to be admired in a grand or wakeful way. It simply waits in its own calm, delicate, and distant, as though it were content to be noticed only by the sleepiest part of the mind, the part that no longer wishes to analyze, no longer wishes to hold tightly, and only wants to float. And perhaps that is why this nighttime story lingers near it now, because there is something especially tender about a galaxy that seems to glow by whisper rather than declaration, by softness rather than brilliance. And in that softness, there is a lesson that the body understands as it nears deep sleep, that not everything beautiful needs to arrive brightly, and not every truth needs a sharp outline in order to soothe. You may imagine Triangulum ahead as a pale turning presence, its spiral shape only half felt, more like a memory of a pattern than a pattern itself, a graceful arrangement of distant light seems to rise and fade at once, and all around it, the darkness of the local group remains broad and kind, not empty, not severe, but velvety and spacious, the kind of dark that allows every little glow to feel sheltered. And as you rest in that feeling now, letting your breathing move in a slow and easy rhythm, it may seem that Triangulum is breathing too, not literally, only in the story-like way that all calm things seem to breathe when watched with sleepy attention, brightening slightly in imagination, then softening back into mist, its presence less a destination than a mood behind you, far beyond clear thought. The Milky Way is still there as a warm remembrance of home, and somewhere off in another silver hush, Andromeda keeps its broad and neighboring calm, while the many small galaxies of this galactic neighborhood continue their quiet companionship. But here, beside the whispering suggestion of Triangulum, everything feels especially hushed, especially suited to a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep. Because this is the kind of place where the mind does not need to do very much at all, only drift and listen, and let the feeling of distance wash over it like cool water over smooth stones. There is a peaceful beauty in knowing that a galaxy can be both immense and gentle, both full of stars and still somehow subtle. And as this calming narration moves onward, you may let that beauty become simpler and simpler until Triangulum is no longer a named object in space, but only a soft spiral lantern hanging far away in the night. One more calm light among calm lights, one more quiet note in the large and sleepy music of the local group. And perhaps your own thoughts are beginning to imitate it now, turning softly, loosening their edges, becoming fainter each time they return, as if the mind itself were becoming a little spiral of silver haze, rotating so slowly that even the turning feels like rest. Around this distant galaxy, there is only silence and time, and the almost invisible patience of gravity. And tonight, even those ideas are gentle enough to become part of the lullaby, because the universe in this sleep story is not a place of pressure, but of permission, permission to slow down, permission to leave some thoughts unfinished, permission to let the day recede the way a galaxy recedes into soft darkness when you no longer look at it directly. And if there is anything in you still trying to stay fully awake, let it sit quietly near Triangulum for a little while longer. Let it watch that whispering spiral from afar. Let it be soothed by how little it needs to understand in order to feel safe. This gentle bedtime passage does not need to give you anything sharper than peace. And peace is already here, in the wide distances between neighboring galaxies, in the faint old glow that reaches across those distances, in the soft idea that the local group is not merely a structure in space, but a neighborhood of patient lights, keeping one another company through the longest night imaginable. And with each sentence, the neighborhood seems to grow quieter, the galaxies dimmer, the spaces between them kinder, until even Triangulum, delicate and serene, begins to fade at the edges like breath on cool glass. Now the story itself may be becoming misty to you. And that is perfectly right, because a sleep story should eventually feel less like language and more like weather, less like information, and more like a blanket of calm laid lightly over the mind. And here beside Triangulum's whispering spiral, that blanket settles more fully, more warmly, more completely, until there is almost nothing left to hold, except the feeling of floating in a dark so velvety. It seems to cradle every star, every galaxy, every fading thought, and somewhere inside, that cradle deep sleep waits without impatience, arriving as gently as distant starlight, as quietly as the turning of a far-off spiral, as softly as this bedtime story, now carrying you farther from wakefulness and farther into rest, where even the local group itself becomes only a hush of neighboring lights, rocking slowly in the boundless dark. Now, as this sleep story continues in its slow and gentle way, the local group begins to feel less like a collection of separate galaxies and more like one great sleeping neighborhood held together by distance, memory, and the quiet patience of gravity. And you may sense yourself drifting toward its soft horizon, not a true edge, because the universe does not build itself with walls, but a dreamlike boundary in the imagination, where our galactic neighborhood begins to thin into wider darkness. And this is a beautiful place for a bedtime story to linger, because here everything seems to loosen in the calmest possible way. The Milky Way now only a warm and misty remembrance, Andromeda a silver hush behind, and to one side, Triangulum, a faint spiral whisper, almost too delicate to name, and the many small galaxies of the local group, reduced to tiny embers scattered through the velvet dark, each one present, each one gentle, each one softened by distance, until the whole neighborhood appears to float like a handful of lanterns resting on a still midnight sea. Perhaps your breathing has grown slower now, so slow that it feels almost as if the story itself is breathing for you. Each sentence arriving with the ease of a tide folding onto a silent shore, and then withdrawing again without effort. And in that soft rhythm, it becomes natural to imagine the local group from farther away than before. Not so far that it becomes abstract, but far enough that its overall shape feels calm and complete, a small family of galaxies adrift in a much larger darkness, with space opening outward in every direction, spacious enough to hold every star, every halo, every old stellar stream, and every unfinished thought you no longer need to carry. There is something deeply relaxing in that image, because the farther outward you drift in imagination, the less hurried anything appears, until motion becomes almost indistinguishable from rest, and even change itself seems to yawn and settle under a blanket of cosmic time. And perhaps that is one of the gentlest truths the local group has offered tonight. That scale can soften us, that distance can quiet the mind, that when we widen our view enough, the sharp little urgencies of the day begin to fade the way bright lights fade when seen through mist. Here at this soft horizon, our galactic neighborhood does not end so much as dissolve, its galaxies still keeping one another company, still held in broad relationship, yet also yielding gracefully to the wider universe beyond. And because this is a relaxing story meant to help you fall asleep, we do not go farther than this. We do not push outward into larger clusters or brighter abstractions. We simply remain here, where the local group becomes dreamlike at the edges, where home is still near enough to feel comforting, and far enough away to feel serene. If you wish, you may picture the whole neighborhood resting in the palm of the night, the Milky Way like a remembered lamp left glowing in a distant room, Andromeda like a neighboring window lit behind sheer curtains, Triangulum like a final delicate glimmer at the far end of a quiet hall, and the little dwarf galaxies like sleepy candles whose flames have burned low. And all around them, the dark is not empty, but tender, a vast and patient fabric, holding every light without strain, never asking them to shine more brightly than they already do. That tenderness may begin to spread through the story now, through the spaces between the words, through the long and gentle hush that follows each image, until the body understands it has permission to release a little more, to let the shoulders rest, to let the jaw grow loose, to let the mind stop searching for the next thing, and simply drift here among neighboring galaxies that have all the time in the universe to be where they are. And perhaps that is why the local group has become such a soothing companion tonight, because it is large enough to humble worry, but gentle enough not to replace worry with awe too bright for sleep. And instead, it offers something softer, a nighttime story made of patient spirals, faint halos, old stars, invisible balance, and intergalactic quiet, all woven together into one calm field of belonging, one broad cradle in which the mind can finally stop trying to hold itself so tightly together. Now even the idea of a horizon may be fading, because the galaxies themselves are fading, growing dimmer and more mist-like, as though the whole neighborhood were slowly being wrapped in a deeper blue. And that too is comforting, because a gentle bedtime should not sharpen toward an ending. It should soften toward it, becoming lighter and quieter and less insistent with every breath. And so, the local group begins to drift farther from thought and nearer to feeling, no longer something to picture clearly, only something to sense, a spacious hush, a calm arrangement, a nearby portion of the universe turning slowly in the dark, while you float more deeply into stillness. Let the Milky Way become a memory of warmth. Let Andromeda become a silver blur. Let Triangulum dissolve into a faint and pearly suggestion. Let the little galaxies turn into scattered motes of quiet light, and let the dark between them grow smooth and wide and wonderfully kind, until this sleep story itself feels like nothing more than a soft current carrying you past the last bright edges of wakefulness and toward a place where no thought needs finishing, no image needs holding, and sleep arrives the way the local group has moved all night long, gently, patiently, and almost without being seen. As this sleep story moves more softly than ever through the local group, you may begin to feel that our galactic neighborhood is no longer something you are traveling through, but something you are gently sinking into, the way a tired mind sinks into a final layer of comfort just before deep sleep. And from this dreamy distance, the Milky Way, Andromeda, Triangulum, and all their smaller companions seem less like separate galaxies and more like a hush of neighboring lights resting together in one vast and velvety night. And perhaps that is the most soothing way to know them now, not as objects to be studied, not as names to remember, but as presences, calm and patient, each one glowing just enough to keep the darkness tender. And as this bedtime story continues, your only task is to let the images arrive slowly and then soften, to let them fade at the edges the way starlight fades when mist gathers over a quiet field, because this relaxing story was always meant to help you fall asleep by making science feel like shelter, by turning the local group into a gentle bedtime landscape where every galaxy keeps a respectful distance and every distance feels full of peace. Now the neighborhood itself seems to breathe in long, slow motions, not because galaxies truly breathe, but because when the mind becomes sleepy enough, everything calm begins to feel as if it rises and falls in sympathy with your own breath. The Milky Way behind you, like a warm and distant memory. Andromeda ahead, like a silver lamp, lowered nearly to darkness. Triangulum so faint now that it seems woven from pearl-colored fog, and the little dwarf galaxies scattered among them like tiny lights left glowing in windows far across a sleeping valley, and all of them held in such patient relationship that even gravity feels less like a force and more like a kindness, a silent promise that nothing here is lost, nothing is hurried, nothing is asked to move faster than it was ever meant to move. If you rest with that thought for a moment, it may ease some quiet place in you, because the local group becomes a reminder that belonging does not require nearness, that harmony does not require sameness, and that beauty can exist most fully when it is allowed space. And so the galaxies remain separate and yet together, distant and yet companionable, immense and yet strangely cozy in the imagination, and the dark between them is not a blank absence, but a cool and gentle fabric, something like midnight velvet stretched wide enough to hold all the lanterns of our galactic neighborhood without tugging at any of them, without disturbing their calm. Perhaps by now your thoughts are growing fewer, and each one that does appear drifts more slowly than before, as if even the mind has learned from these galaxies how to move with patience, how to turn in long circles without strain, how to dim without fear. And that is a beautiful thing to feel at the end of a nighttime story, when the waking world has already loosened its grip, and all that remains is this quiet, floating awareness, half listening and half dreaming, carried by calming narration into a place where facts no longer stand upright like lessons, but recline like soft shadows under starlight. Here, at the drowsy heart of our journey, the local group feels like a neighborhood scene from very far away through sleepy eyes. Every bright detail subdued, every outline mellowed, every galaxy transformed into a tender glow, and there is no need to move closer to any of them, because distance itself has become part of the comfort. The way a lullaby is often gentlest when it is sung from another room, low and muffled and uninsistent, asking only that you listen if you wish and rest if you can. The Milky Way remains a home light, Andromeda a neighboring light, Triangulum a quieter light still, and the many small galaxies are like little candles burning at the margins of awareness, while around them the deeper universe waits in complete stillness, not intruding, only widening the sense of peace. And if any part of you still clings to the day, let it watch these lights for a while longer. Let it sit on the silent porch of the imagination and see how gently the cosmos keeps company with itself, how naturally it allows room for every orbit, every halo, every old star, every faint stream of light to exist without noise. This is the hidden comfort of sleepy science, that it reveals a universe not of chaos tonight, but of patience, not of harsh emptiness, but of quiet relation. And the more you drift through that truth, the more your own breathing may become the center of the story, soft in, soft out, like tiny tides beneath a field of stars. Now even the phrase local group may begin to dissolve into feeling, becoming less a term and more a cradle, less a structure and more a mood, a nearby portion of the universe that has opened itself just enough to show you its gentleness before asking nothing more of you at all. And so the galaxies grow dimmer still, the spaces between them smoother still, the whole neighborhood quieter still, until the Milky Way is only warmth, Andromeda only silver, Triangulum only whisper, and the little companions only embers in a blue-black calm. And as the story thins into that softness, sleep can come the way all these galaxies have moved throughout the night, without hurry, without effort, without any need to announce itself, simply arriving in the dark as naturally as starlight, as peacefully as distance, as softly as a final breath that lets the whole neighborhood of the heavens fade into dream. And now, dear listener, this sleep story reaches its softest shore, not with an ending that arrives all at once, but with a slow and tender fading, like the final dimming of a lantern in a quiet room. And as this bedtime story settles around you for the last time tonight, the local group has become so gentle, so distant, and so dreamlike that it no longer feels like a place to travel through, but a peaceful atmosphere in which you can simply rest, with the Milky Way now only a memory of warmth, Andromeda only a silver hush far away, Triangulum only the faintest whisper of a spiral, and the many little dwarf galaxies only tiny embers drifting at the edge of awareness, all of them held in the same great velvet stillness, all of them moving so slowly that their motion feels like sleep itself. And perhaps that is the final gift of our galactic neighborhood, that after all its patient spirals, quiet halos, ancient stars, and silent distances, it has taught the mind how to soften, how to widen, how to stop holding so tightly to the bright and busy shapes of the day. And now, there is nothing left for you to do except drift, because this relaxing story has carried you as far as words can carry anyone, and beyond this point, there is only calm, only night, only the deep and effortless permission to let go. Imagine, if you wish, though there is no need to try, that the entire local group is now far above you and all around you at once, like a ceiling of sleeping lanterns in a house so large and so quiet it has no walls, only distance, and every galaxy has lowered its light for the sake of your rest. Every halo has softened into mist. Every stream of stars has dissolved into a pale thread of memory, and even gravity itself seems less like a force than a gentle hand beneath everything, holding the neighborhood together while holding you too, in the story-like sense that matters tonight, not asking you to stay awake, not asking you to follow, only rocking the last fragments of thought until they too become quiet. Your breathing may be very slow now, so slow that it seems to come from somewhere deeper than effort. And with each easy inhale, the night grows softer. And with each easy exhale, the story drifts farther away until the words are no longer steps to walk on, but a kind of distant weather, a murmur beyond the window of sleep. And this gentle bedtime becomes simpler and simpler, calmer and calmer, until even the idea of astronomy grows featherlight. No longer a collection of facts, but a peaceful feeling of neighboring lights resting together in the dark. The Milky Way is asleep in its own great turning. Andromeda is asleep in its silver distance. Triangulum is asleep in its whispering spiral. The little galaxies are asleep in their long and faithful drifting, and between them, the dark is not empty, not lonely, not cold, but deep and kind and wonderfully still. A soft sea that asks nothing of you except that you float and float and float a little farther from waking thought. If any final thought arrives, let it arrive gently and pass gently, like one last distant star seen through mist, because nothing needs to be finished here. Nothing needs to be solved here. Nothing needs to be remembered here. And that is the beauty of a nighttime story like this one, that it can guide you through real and wondrous things, only to leave you at last in a place beyond effort, where wonder itself becomes quiet enough to sleep beside. Perhaps now the local group is fading even more, the galaxies dimming to soft pearls, then to pale dust, then to almost nothing at all, until all that remains is a feeling of endless, tender space, and you within it, completely safe, completely held, completely free to sink into deep sleep without watching for the moment it happens. Because sleep does not need to be watched, and it does not need to be invited twice. It comes best when the mind stops reaching for it, when the body grows heavy enough to trust the bed beneath it, when the thoughts become wide enough apart that silence can settle between them like snowfall. So let the galaxies go now, one by one, softly. The Milky Way first into warmth, Andromeda next into silver mist, Triangulum next into pearl gray whisper. The small companions last into tiny floating embers, until even those embers fade into the velvet dark, and the dark itself becomes softer than black, softer than blue, softer than any color at all. Just a calm and endless quiet where nothing shines sharply and nothing calls you back. This sleep story is nearly gone now, and its calming narration is only a distant tide, rising and falling so gently you barely notice it. And beyond that tide, there is only rest. And beyond rest, there is deeper rest still, where the whole of our galactic neighborhood has folded itself into dream. And you may follow it there, without effort, without thought, without even needing to listen anymore. Because the night is doing the rest for you now. The quiet is doing the rest for you now. The long, patient rhythm of the universe is doing the rest for you now, carrying you past the last soft edge of wakefulness, past the last remembered glimmer of stars, past the last little ripple of thought, and into that deep, dark, peaceful place where everything becomes still, and the final light in our galactic neighborhood goes gently out.